isn't it? Yeah. There's an account about Pixar in the early days of their company where they decided they want to be all about story and not just about money. On the heels of the success of Toy Story, Disney came to them and said, we'd love it if you would make a sequel to Toy Story. And in typical Disney fashion for that day and age, they said, we don't necessarily want like a feature film that's going to be on 3,000 screens throughout America. We really just want a direct-to-video movie. We just want a direct-to-DVD. And some of you guys might remember some of these because the rules are like this. You take a known brand, you get a story done as fast as possible. You don't necessarily use your A-level animators. You don't use your A-level directors. You just try and get a story out as fast as possible. So usually what happens is the stories are a lot shorter. Usually you don't retain the great voice talent that you normally do. And suddenly you start getting movies like Aladdin 2, The Return of Jafar, or Cinderella 6, Lost in Time, George of the Jungle 2. And I mean, think about this. Brendan Fraser's, his career had dropped so far that he made George of the Jungle 1, and he didn't even return back to George of the Jungle 2, right? It's like, it's not necessarily like the greatest of scenarios. So this is what Disney proposes to Pixar. So Pixar does that very thing. They know their deadlines. They know that they just need to run a story out there and get some of their animators to do it, but it's not a level priority. So they take it back to Disney. Disney looks at it and says, wow, you guys have made some real progress with animation, and we think that you have something here. Why don't you turn this into a feature-length film? Why don't you go ahead and just add 20 minutes of fluff to it? We'll get it long enough to where people don't feel like they're wasting $14, and we will just put it on theaters across America. And Pixar steps back and they say, this doesn't really sit well with us because we're not interested in just making money. We want to tell good stories. But right now we're faced with two options because Disney was not willing to relent on their deadlines. They said, no, you still need to have it done by this date, and it needs to be ready for the theaters by this appointed time. But Pixar has two options. They can either go with option A, which is exactly what Disney wanted, and that's just add 20 minutes of fluff, roll it out. It's going to make money, but it's not going to be a good story. Or you go option B. And option B is you blow up the entire storyboard, you blow up the entire storyline. You put together a new team of great animators and great directors and great storytellers, and you craft a whole new story. But in order to do so, you're going to have to give up your weekends, you're going to have to give up your evenings, you're going to have to sacrifice a lot of time with your family and your friends because Disney is not willing to relent on the deadlines. We're going to have to work around the clock to make it happen. Now what does Pixar do? They go the hard choice. They go option B. They work around the clock. And most critics would agree today that the second Toy Story, Toy Story 2, was better than the first. In fact, at the box office, it was a bigger success than Toy Story. Now, how did this happen? Pixar decided that story was so important that they were willing to forego their weekends, forego their vacations, in order to tell a great story. And in the process, they set a precedent that doesn't matter what the cost, doesn't matter what the sacrifice, we are so willing to sacrifice your story that we will do anything. And my question for you this morning is this. As you examine your life, as you examine the decisions that you make, as you examine the course and the direction that your life is going, are you more likely to see a direct-to-video story or a feature film? What are you more likely to see? When you were in high school and graduating, or you were in college and graduating, and you knew exactly what you wanted to do in life, when you were faced with those decisions that could either go option A, which were easy and safe, or option B, but actually totally made you get where you wanted to go, what direction did you go? What did you do? Maybe even relationally. Are you afraid of commitment? Are you afraid of committing to somebody? Are you in a marriage right now, and the easiest thing to do is going to walk out on it and just leave the other person in the dust, rather than take the hard decision, which is like, we're going to just hunker down and try and get this thing put back together. What about in the home? What kind of husband or wife are you? What kind of mom or dad? Maybe even on a personal level. Is there an adventure that you've always wanted to take, but you just always felt like it wasn't never a great time, or the money just never seemed to make sense, but you've just been putting it off, or maybe you're like me on some mornings where the alarm goes off and you know you're going to work out, but you just hit snooze instead and stay in bed. What story are you writing with your life? When you reach the end of your life and your kids and your grandkids and your great grandkids are surrounding you, are you going to be happy with the story that you're retelling about your life? I believe that most of us, we ultimately know what the right next step would be to get where we want to go. We know that we want to be a great husband or a great wife, and we know that that means sometimes I have to lay my pride aside. That's ultimately what we know we have to do. But it's hard. Like, that's something that it costs us something. Or we even know professionally. We know professionally that it would be a lot easier to just lie to the client and tell them, like, you can have it done at this time for this price, even though you know it's not going to happen. That's the easiest thing, but the hardest thing to do is tell them the truth about it. You know that maybe even relationally, the hard thing to do would be, hey, I'm willing to commit, even though that means I have to give up some of my some of my freedom, some of my plans for the near future. But I'm willing to do it because I love this person enough. What story are you writing with your life? I'd say that most of us ultimately know what our right next step would be. And for those of you who are not believers in Jesus here this morning, this would still ring true for you, that you're writing a story somewhere or somehow with your life. And the question is, are you going to be happy with that story you're writing? But for those of you in this room who are followers of Jesus, you said, I'm all in with Jesus. He is my boss. He is my coach. He is my CEO. I'm going to ask that same question about your spiritual journey, your faith journey. Are you happy with the story that you're writing with your life? Because I believe that God has a great story in plan for you. That God ultimately would love for you to have a great life that you can look back on with absolutely no regrets. He wants you to kick that habit that you just keep clinging onto. God, He wants you to restore the relationships that seem to be afraid of not getting any better. He wants you to let go of that grudge that's so easy to hold on to. Ladies, you have a boyfriend that you know you need to dump, and God wants you to do that. Some of you are staying in debt when you shouldn't. Some of you moms, you have attitudes with your kids that you should drop. And some of you fathers, you're so quick to get angry and have your temper flare up. And God ultimately wants you to stop that. And He wants you to drop it. And you know that that's what you need to do. God is putting that on your heart. But it's really hard to take those next steps. And why is that? Because ultimately, we don't actually know what the final conclusion is going to be if we go with the harder route. We could try it and it could blow up in our face. We could go that direction and, we might not get the raise. We might not get the promotion like we thought we were going to. But my question is this. Are you willing to pay whatever price is needed to live a life with no regrets? Are you willing to do the hard thing, the hard decision, even if it means it might cost you something? Of course, this is Christmas time. And there is we're going to look this morning at just the Christmas story and what we can learn about living a life with no regrets and being willing to walk out in faith, even when the road doesn't seem like it's lining up. Most of us, we've heard the Christmas story, 1,000 times. And what we do is we Disneyfy the Christmas story to a place where it doesn't seem like there's that much of a risk. We think that all the characters ultimately knew exactly what was going to happen. And we have this idea in our head that, that Joseph and Mary, they come riding down on their donkey. And of course, there's no room in the inn, but there's this nice, comfortable, warm, manger down, with the cattle and the horses. And it's almost like camping. It's this really sweet moment where the little halos are above Jesus' head and Mary and Joseph's heads. And, the cattle, they're lowing. I don't even know what that means, but they're lowing. It's nice. It's a sweet moment. And what do you know? Angels appear, and the shepherds are like, we should go and worship Him. And they come in all reverent. And they know exactly what's happening. And all of a sudden, these three guys walk in with all these gifts, and everybody is happy. And it's this beautiful, clean picture that really sucks all of the humanity and realism out of it. That's a story that most of us want to think about. We picture the nativity on Mom's piano. We picture that Christmas special that we see on TV where it's just so safe and so sterile and so clean. But what I want to talk to you guys this morning about is just this road to Bethlehem. This road to worship King Jesus as a baby was not always a sure thing in the minds of the people in the story. In fact, this morning we're going to talk about the wise men. We're going to talk about these magi, the guys who come with the gifts and bring them to the foot of little baby Jesus. Because most of us, we just assume that this is exactly what they're expecting, but I would happen to say that this is probably nothing like what they expected. And to understand a little bit of who they are, we need to understand that these are men coming from probably 800 miles to the east of Bethlehem. They were probably religious scholars who had been given the documents of the Old Testament because of Israel being captured 600 years prior to the birth of Jesus. Okay, think about this. 600 years have passed since Israel has been basically gobbled up by Babylon and taken 800 miles eastward. And these are the documents that these men are reading. When all of a sudden, in the sky, they see this star. And so they say, okay, what is to our west? What countries lie to our west? And as they start looking at maps and doing research, they discover that there was once this proud nation of Israel who had a proud lineage of a God who loved them and made a lineage of kings who would rule and reign all throughout that region. But they were then captured by other invading nations and armies, and suddenly their country ceased to exist the way that it had been described for so many hundreds of years. And as they look at the star in the sky and they start reading through the ancient religious texts of these Israelite and Jewish people, they probably came across several different prophecies, something like maybe this in Ezekiel 34:23. And I will set over them one shepherd, my servant David. He will feed them and be a shepherd to them. And I, the Lord, will be their God, and my servant David will be a prince among my people. I, the Lord, have spoken. They probably read prophecies like this and said, these Jewish people are expecting a new king. They're expecting their country to rise from the ashes of oppression. They're expecting a king to rise from the ashes and really to restore this kingship and restore this nation of Israel. This is what they're expecting. And if we're seeing this in the West, if we're seeing this star in the sky, and if we're reading these same documents, more than likely they are also reading and seeing the same exact things. Man, how great would it be to be there as we see the birth of a new nation? How incredible would it be to get there and see a king born and see a new king being restoring the nation of Israel? And so they embark on a journey that will last for at least 40 days and 40 nights through the wilderness over the course of 800 miles. And they start journeying to go and see this new king. Like us today, we can pick up our phone and see what's happening around the world at any given moment. But in order for them to see what's happening, they have to travel and actually have to get there. And in Matthew chapter 2, this is where the story picks up. It says, Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the reign of King Herod. About that time, some wise men from eastern lands arrived in Jerusalem asking, "Where's the newborn king of the Jews? We saw a star as it rose, and we have come to worship him." They're assuming that if anybody's going to know where this king is born, if anybody's going to know where the new king is, it's going to be the capital. It's going to be Jerusalem. And it says this in verse 3, King Herod was deeply disturbed when he heard this, as was everyone in Jerusalem. He called a meeting of the leading priests and teachers of religious law and asked, "Where is this Messiah supposed to be born?" Okay, quick time out. If men 800 miles to the east can figure out what's going on, what do you think they're expecting to find? They're expecting to find this entire region in upheaval. They're expecting to find a grassroots effort to try and put the new king in place and reigning over the new nation of Israel. This is what they're expecting, but what do they find? They find that when they make it to Jerusalem, nobody has any idea what they're talking about. So much so that the king actually has to ask, "Hey, where's that baby supposed to be born?" I mean, this is what it says. And it says in verse 5, "In Bethlehem in Judea," they said, "for this is what the prophet wrote. And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not least among the ruling cities of Judah, for a ruler will come from you, who will be the shepherd for my people, Israel," which is another fulfilled prophecy from the prophet Micah. It's found in the Old Testament. This is something that they all had access to. And you would assume if anybody was going to know that this is where he was going to be born, if anybody was going to know that this is where the new king was going to be, it would be the capital. It would be the religious scribes. It would be the king of Israel. Then in verse 7 it says, "Then Herod called for a private meeting with the wise men, and he learned from them the time when the star first appeared. Then he told them, 'Go to Bethlehem and search carefully for the child, and when you find him, come back and tell me so that I can go and worship him too.'" Now, if you're the wise men, this has got to be super confusing at this point. Because some things that we don't necessarily see in the text, because we're reading this in the 21st century in America, and we're not in the first century in Israel, is that the star's probably been in the sky for at least 2 years at this point. If you're going to hear rumors about a new king being born, it's probably not going to take 2 years for the news to make it to the capital. Furthermore, Bethlehem is not far away from Jerusalem. It's not. It's like 5.5 miles away. I mean, let's just put this into context. That's like the Brea Mall. Okay? That's like the Brea Mall. Imagine if there was an earthquake and the epicenter was the Brea Mall. And it was like a 7.5 on the Richter scale. And it's going to be like this earth-moving, shaking experience. Don't you think news would make it here to Yorba Linda? Right? Like, it's just 5.5 miles away. The king is supposedly born 5.5 miles, 2 years ago, away from Jerusalem. What do these wise men expect to find? They expect to find an entire nation celebrating the birth of a new king, and they're not finding that at all. 5.5 miles away, the king has no idea what they're talking about. And it says, after this interview, the wise men went their way. And the star they had seen in the east guided them to Bethlehem. It went ahead of them and stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were filled with joy. They entered the house, and they saw the child with his mother, Mary. Okay, another time out. It was already weird that the king had no idea what they were talking about, but suddenly they make it to Bethlehem, and they supposedly find the baby. And what do they see? They don't see this family that has everything put together. They see a teenage mom from a working-class family who's not even from Bethlehem, living suddenly in Bethlehem with her carpenter husband and this little baby. Now, I'm not sure how much research the wise men did, but there are a lot of clear prophecies in the book of Isaiah that this baby would be born to a virgin. And as we all know, the baby was born to a virgin, but unless they're asking some probing questions, they're not only seeing a mom, they're also seeing a dad. This can't be what they expected whatsoever. Working class family, teenage mom and dad both in the picture. This can't be what they thought they would find. It just can't be. You would not expect the king to be born in these circumstances. So for them to say, yeah, this is actually the king, this is God incarnate, this is Emmanuel, God with us, that's quite a stretch, isn't it? Wouldn't that be a really weird jump, logically, to say that, yeah, this working class family really is the family who is ushering in this new king? This would be like taking a vacation to Portland or Denver and, saying hey, on my vacation, I met the mayor. Oh yeah, you met the mayor? Tell me about him. Well, he was a little disheveled. He was yelling at birds in the park, but he told me that he was the mayor. So I gave him $20 and said, hey man, keep the streets clean, right? That would be ridiculous, wouldn't it? But that's almost like what we're seeing right here. We're seeing the most unlikely of scenarios, supposedly bringing out the new king of this once proud nation. And it says in verse 11, they entered the house and saw the child with his mother Mary. They bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasure chest and gave him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Just file this in the back of your mind. We're going to get back to it in a second. They gave a lot. They gave the gold, the frankincense, and the myrrh. Verse 12. When it was time to leave, they returned to their own country by another route. For God had warned them in a dream not to return to Herod. Once again, in that file in the back of your mind, just keep in mind that they gave, then God spoke. We'll get back to that in a minute. So as you examine your life, as you look at the story that you're writing, with the opportunities that you have, the option A's and the option B's, when you look at the story you're writing, the legacy that you're leaving to your kids and your grandkids and your great-grandkids, what can we learn from this story about the wise men? What's applicable to us even to this day? Well, I've got some observations I'd like to share with you. The first is this. The wise men didn't have all the answers, but they followed the ones that they had. The wise men didn't have all the answers, but they followed the ones that they had. What was their proof? 600-year-old documents and a star. Think about that. They had 600-year-old documents and a star. Most of us don't trust scientific findings from the 90s anymore, right? We don't trust medical and health. We used to have 4 basic food groups. What happened to that, right? We don't even say that anymore. We used to have a food pyramid. This is like the 90s. We don't even trust that to this day. These documents are 600 years old. They've got those and they've got a star. But God put it on their heart that this is the truth. This is what they need to find. And similarly, a lot of you have in mind exactly what your next step needs to be in your faith journey as well as your personal journey. And you know that's what you need to do, but you're not 100% sure how everything else is going to line up to make it happen. And some of us are so frozen in fear that we're unwilling to take that right next step because we don't think we have all the answers. But I think the same thing is true for the wise men as true for us today. That you might not have all the answers. You might not know the Bible backwards and forwards. You might not know every single detail to every situation. But God doesn't want you frozen in fear. He wants you to step out on faith and keep following even if you don't have all the answers. The wise men didn't have all the answers, but you should follow the ones that you have. The second thing is this. They kept going even when their expectations and reality weren't identical. They kept going even when their expectations and reality weren't identical. They didn't find a king, they found an insignificant baby. They didn't find a royal family, they found a working class teenage mom. They didn't find a nation in upheaval, they found that the king had no idea what they were even talking about. Their expectations and reality, they weren't identical, but they kept going. Similarly for us. A lot of us know what that next step is, and we're going to take that next step, and things are not going to come up roses for us. It's just not. God will put it on your heart that you need to be generous. And so you're either going to start giving a tithe, or you're going to give money to a family member who's in need. You might even just give money to the guy that's at the intersection who needs a meal. And then the next day, you're going to lose your job. There's no guarantee that if you just be generous, like, everything's going to come up roses for you. But you know that's the right step. Some of you, you're going to reach out to an estranged family member that your relationship is frayed with, and they're going to completely block you out. It might happen, but you know that's the right step. Some of you are finally going to talk to that friend about Jesus and the difference he's made in your life, and they're going to get angry with you, and they're going to tell you to shut up. They don't want to hear it anymore. It might happen. It could happen, but you know it's the right thing. Some of you, even this week maybe, you're going to be faced with an ethical decision at work where you can either lie and get the deal, or you can be honest and hope for the best. And you know what the right thing to do is, and that's to be honest, and you might lose out on the deal. But the reality is, if it's the right thing, it's the right thing. Even when your expectations and your reality don't line up, keep following the star. And the third thing is this. They believed so strongly that they were willing to sacrifice. They believed that this was what they were looking for so strongly, they were willing to sacrifice. Of course, we know they gave the gold, the frankincense, and the myrrh. And these were very expensive gifts. I didn't realize this until I did some research in the last couple of weeks. Gold, of course, is still valuable to us, but most of us don't have like the frankincense jar at home. I did some research, and come to find out, frankincense at this day and age was probably valued at about $500 a pound. Myrrh was even more valuable, $4,000 a pound. If I was the wise men and I walked into this unseemingly weird situation where like the baby was, I think I would have been like, you know, this seems like it might be a cool thing, but why don't we just keep these aside? Everybody pull out your wallets. All right, let's see. What we got 20 here and a 5. You know, like that's what I think I would have done in that moment. But they believed so strongly that they were willing to sacrifice for it. And the same is true for us. All worship requires a sacrifice. All worship requires sacrifice. And it's not always monetarily. Sometimes it's of our time. Sometimes it's of our comfort. Sometimes it's of our pride. But everything that we truly love requires a sacrifice if we truly want to worship it. And so my question for you is this. What are you hoping your legacy will be in your life? What story are you writing day in and day out with the options that you have? Are you going option A, which is safe and it doesn't push you out of your comfort zone, it's exactly what you would expect yourself to do? Or are you going option B? It's a little bit riskier, it's a little bit more out of your comfort zone, but you know that that is the right decision for you in your life. I believe that most of you know what your right next step is, but maybe you're scared to take it. Maybe that next step won't produce the results that you're expecting. Possibly, you're not willing to give something up to get there. But I want to challenge you. Are you willing to live a life with no regrets? Are you willing to do whatever it takes to get to exactly where you feel like God wants you to go? On a personal level, in 2015, and starting in just a couple weeks, what are you hoping will define your 2015? Is that going to be you finally get in shape and you say, all right, I don't care if I lose a little sleep, I'm getting up, I'm going to exercise? Is 2015 going to be the year you finally start writing that book that you've always wanted to do? Is 2015 going to be the year that you finally take that vacation to connect with your kids? Is 2015 going to be the year that you finally build date nights into your to your schedule with your husband or your wife? Will 2015 be the year that you finally start making steps to get out of debt? But what about your spiritual journey? What is that next step that God's been putting on your heart? What is that next step with Him that He's been asking you to take? Who is that person that you know you need to talk to about Jesus? What is that really hard decision to give up some sort of sin or some sort of temptation that you just keep putting off and keep putting off and keep putting off? I would challenge you this morning that if you're a follower of Jesus, if you're somebody who says, Jesus is the Lord of my life, He is my boss, He is my coach, He is my CEO, I would challenge you to hand your pen over to Him. Challenge your pen over to Jesus and let Him write the story with your life. Now, the story of Jesus is the ultimate unexpected twist. You have a perfect, holy, majestic God coming to earth, not with the trumpets and not with the procession and not with the royal welcoming by the entire earth, but rather coming as a baby. Coming as what's described in other passages of Scripture as nothing beautiful to behold or majestic about your appearance, but nothing to attract us to you. That's how he came. He laid his majesty and his glory aside. And why did he do it? Because he loves us. And he loves us so much, he was willing to sacrifice for us. And he was willing to give everything he had. He's willing to set aside everything that he had for you and for me. And that same God who raises Jesus from the dead, the same God who led the wise men to the west to find this baby Jesus, is wanting to guide and wanting to lead you. He has put something on your heart, something that you know that your life will be incomplete if you don't try and do. God has put something inside your being that says, this is what I was designed for, this is what I was made for. And he is pushing you and pushing you and pushing you to take that right next step in your life. But we're either too scared or we're unsure of what the results are going to be, or we're not willing to give something up. But I'm going to ask you this. What are you willing to give up to live a life with no regrets?